everybody, Patrick Connor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. We got some boxing history to talk today, which means I'm here with my dude Aris Pina, CompuBox operator, and of course, fellow fight history lover like myself, and talking some grudge matches. Aris, what's going on, bro? How you doing?
Everything is good, my man. Yeah, we're here to talk about some grudge matches because this past weekend we just concluded a major one that had been brewing for, I guess, a number of years, over a decade now, it seems. So yeah, that's what's going on.
Started way back in Tenerife. Wait, no, that wasn't him. That wasn't Amir Khan. I'm just kidding. Nah, dude,
That wasn't Amir Khan. That was some other goose.
Yeah, some fool who went after him. No, I don't know precisely where it started, but look, it's kind of like a local grudge match. We're going to talk about another local grudge match that we talked about that I brought up on a different show years ago, but I think it's time for like an update. That shit was like 6-7 years ago at this point, but it's crazy we've been even doing the show that long. But nonetheless, this UK grudge match between Kell, Brook, and Amir Khan, it seems to have risen because they were both really good amateur standouts and good local prospects and stuff like that coming up. Not quite at the same time. Kell Brook came a little bit after Amir Khan had developed and emerged, but nonetheless, kind of right around the same time, roughly the same weight division. Kell Brook, I think, for financial reasons, was calling out Amir Khan for a number of years. Amir Khan's like, screw that. Partially, at least, because he was waiting to face Manny Pacquiao or Floyd
Mayweather,
which he never did. Oh, Amir Khan.
For years and years and years, he was trying to get a Mayweather fight.
Like, always seemed
really
like trying.
And he was like begging for it. He was, in the early days of boxing Twitter.
Yeah, he tried like aggression. He tried reverse psychology. He tried like all sorts of tactics, dude. And Floyd was just like, get this guy out of here.
And look, man, the fight might have been interesting for a couple of rounds because of Khan's speed, but once Mayweather started timing it, which he inevitably would have, it was only a matter of time before Floyd would have scored a spectacular knockout or something like that. You know what I mean?
It probably would have been a pretty massive fight in the UK, or even in Vegas. It would have been pretty big.
And especially when Khan was like trying to go for it, I would say that was around. Well, I mean, he was featured on HBO, what, mid to 2010s or like early 2010s, around then, stuff like that. So like,
yeah, for sure. Like right around the time of like the Maidana fight would have been right around when probably he was angling for it. And I mean, I thought he could have lost that fight, could have been stopped like twice during that fight, came out on the winning end. That's cool.
And he almost scored a first round knockout. I mean, only superhumans like Maidana are able to get up from a ridiculous body shot like that, because I remember when that happened, me and my partner, we both like started closing our laptops thinking it was over. Like, oh, this is an early night. We looked and we saw him get up and we just kind of like, wait, what?
Yeah, I remember that. I remember and thinking like, because he looked like he was like, nah, he didn't even have an interest getting up for the first couple seconds of the count.
Those type of body shots. When you get hit with a body shot like that, bro, you don't get up from 99.9% of the time. The only exception is a guy like Maidana. But yeah, this, to give you a context though, this rivalry has, as far back as like has been, people have been calling for it, or guys calling, like Brook calling him out. To give you a context of how far back this was, Brandon Rio's Victor Ortiz was still a fight that people were clamoring for at this point when this fight was first being discussed, and people were just like,
kind of clamoring for it. I'm not
I guess so, yeah. And the other one that's always been the long-standing joke when it comes to marinating, Juan Manuel Lopez against Yuriorkis Gamboa. So that gives you a context of how far back this fight has gone, and it just never happened. And you thought it would be a no-brainer because both from the UK, both are on the same weight division, both have massive followings, everything like that, world championships. It was just, it kind of wrote itself, but it just really never happened for for one reason or another. Like you mentioned, Khan was trying to chase bigger fights. Brook was chasing for Khan, but at the same time, he was one of those guys that didn't quite have the star level, I guess, that Khan was at. He was a star in himself, but just Khan almost felt like, you'd be relegated moving a step back if he gave Brook the opportunity, whereas he was trying to chase, guy. Right. He was more established in America, so on and so forth. And then things just took different routes. Khan obviously went on to fight Candelo and other guys. Brook went on to fight Triple G, got his face broken. Then
it seemed like there was some level. It seemed almost like there was some amount of like spite too. Mm-hmm. Because like at some point it kind of seemed like Khan was just like, nah, I'm just not giving this guy that
Oh,
opportunity.
absolutely. And that made Brook even more bitter and mad about it
Right.
because he was almost arrogant about it. Almost just kind of like, you're beneath me. I don't, no time for you type deal. And yeah, so this was just brewing for a long time, but better late than ever, I guess. Both guys now in the twilight of their careers. And it made for a compelling fight because you just weren't sure what was going to happen. Before the fight, no one was really quite sure whether Khan's chin was going to hold up or Brook's face was going to hold up or
Right.
who was more
Worn,
shot on,
shot,
whatever it was
whatever.
going to
Yeah.
be. Yeah. There was a lot of questions going into it.
Yeah, and legitimately too, because Kell Brook has, since getting pretty badly injured against Gennady Golovkin, has been not he's been kind of out of the game, like at least not
Yeah.
at a level where he was like in the early 2000 or 2010s, mid 2010s. He was clearly pulling himself away from like European and local level British kind of 147 pound, 54 pounds. He had pulled himself away from that level for sure and felt as if he deserved that shot at Amir Khan. And, in terms of merit, he probably did or whatever. But yeah, their paths just never truly converged. And it was tough to know exactly what Kell Brook was bringing to the table. It was just, I think a lot of people did feel, though, and obviously rightly so in hindsight, that once Amir Khan started getting tagged, that it's like a matter of time, like pretty much in any fight. He's got the hand speed, he's got good power, but his head movement is nil. His defense suffers awfully for it. And his chin's bad. He has like remarkable recovery powers. Like, I mean,
And
all
that's
told.
always made for fun fights over the year because, like you just mentioned, with his hand speed and the way he throws punches and everything, he can go out to a fast lead and he's very flashy and it looks good, especially early on when he was in his prime. But all it took was one shot before he got sparked.
Yep.
And perfect example would be the Danny Garcia fight, right? Like
Oh man.
he was, I mean, not, Garcia was getting whooped in that fight. Like Khan was doing what he had to, for the first 2.5 rounds or whatever it was. Khan was looking superb. Garcia clearly was struggling with his speed and all that, but you could tell Garcia was still throwing with him. He wasn't just trying to counter after whatever. He was punching with Khan, which is what you have to do with a guy like that. And eventually, one of those left hooks landed, and the rest wrote itself like that. But that's, like you said, that was the intangible about Khan. That's what always made him everybody intrigued by him. Is that all it took was one punch, and then you see him skating around, and it's like, you know, either he's going to survive or he's not. Like in the Maidana fight, for instance, when like we just talked about with the body shots, everything like that, he was almost hurt. He was almost taken out near the end of that fight.
Was
And
was the Danny Garcia fight the one where he gets up and like he's like on the ropes and like they're like he's like, do you want to continue and shit? And he's like,
yeah, exactly. Yep,
and the
totally.
ref's like, no, no,
Yeah, because
fucking
he went
kidding me.
down again. He got up and he fought back. And it was just on instinct. You could totally tell. And I think he survived the round. Then the next round, he went down again. And they were just kind of like, no. And he tried to protest, but you can see like the lights were on, but there was no
Yeah.
one inside.
Yeah. I mean, I got to give it to Amir Khan, dude. However you feel about the guy, he's clearly a dumbass. Like, I say that with love because I'm kind of a dumbass sometimes, but like, he's
Yeah,
clearly a dumbass. But, he's made some funky
he's been
decisions.
fearless. He's been fearless too. He's not a guy that's ever tried to duck anybody.
But
You know,
that's what I was going to say was when it comes to his boxing career, when it comes to, you know, entertaining fights, being entertaining. Dude, he's always been entertaining. Sometimes not by choice. Sometimes he doesn't want to be entertaining, but he's almost always been entertaining. And actually, really the instances where he hasn't been entertaining is when he's done like when he's stuck to a game plan and been able to do, like what he wanted to do. And but whatever, I would take watching his career pretty much any day of the week because it's been fun. It's been a
it's
pretty
memorable.
good career.
Absolutely. But, all roads lead to an end. And I think his career basically was ended this past Saturday. So like we said, there was a bunch of back and forth. People were wondering what was going to happen. Well, we found out within the first round what was going to happen because Brook just dominated the whole fight. Um,
Yeah.
I did the CompuBox numbers. I counted for Brook that night, and right off the jump, total punches he threw 224 compared to 151 to Khan. So all roads lead to an end, right? And unfortunately, Khan's came in this fight because he totally wasn't in it. I mean, he did show flashes of his speed early on, but Brook was just much more accurate. You can tell he was dialed in early on, and like the first punches that he landed, Khan was completely inept and just couldn't handle it. And what was really more disturbing was that like you mentioned before, Khan has never really had a good chin, and he's been hurt plenty of times or straight up knocked out. But the first punch that Brook really landed, Khan was already on spaghetti legs completely. And as the Whisper song used to say, and the beat goes on, because like that was just a straight whooping from there. I counted the punches for Kell Brook for this fight, and Brook threw 224 punches and landed 79 punches. All right, that's pretty impressive off the bat right there. But the main thing is he threw 154 power punches that I counted, and he landed 64 of them. Khan only threw 69 power punches and landed 19 of them. Now, when people try to say, oh, numbers of this and that, that really showed you though what was going on in this fight. Like it was one-way traffic from beginning to end. And Khan was brave, and he did have a couple of moments where he did land a couple of combinations here and there. And Brook, I will say, showed that he is past it too, because I think like it was just one of those fights that like if Khan had a little bit more, it would have been more competitive. But Khan was completely shot, and Brook was just beating on him from there. Like it was one of those things that like I think if he threw more to the body and just kind of varied his attack, he probably would have knocked out Khan sooner. But he was just trying to go straight up, take him completely out.
He was trying to time single shots. Like he it looked like he wobbled him in either the end of the first or early second round. I can't remember which.
It was in the beginning of the first round. Khan was doing the majority of the work for like the first minute and a half. Khan was throwing, and Brook was just kind of like watching him. And then finally, when Brook decided to open up and land one of his chocolate brownies, what is that? The right hand he lands. Khan completely just like his legs just went. His eyes got all buggy that they usually do, and you can just you see his hands go up and he's trying to keep it up while his
legs go. His legs start doing the locking up thing. Yeah.
Ice skates.
Yeah.
And
as soon as Brook kind of settled down and stopped looking for a single shot, he started landing, because Amir Khan's his defense just isn't very good.
And his accuracy was on point there, man. Brook was really good with his jab. He was good with his right hand. His uppercuts were beautiful. He was landing hooks. He wasn't throwing a ton of body shots, but the times that he would throw, he was accurate with those too. Like he was just, he was dialed in. So long story short, it was probably best that the referee stopped the fight when he did, because Khan was on the verge of getting knocked out really, really bad. But hey, this chapter has ended. Both guys seem like they buried the hatchet after the fight. They've said so more or less in the post-fight interviews and things that have come out afterwards. And I hope this is the end for Khan and for Brook. This is probably he got one more fight, big fight in him, because I think both Connor Ben and Eubank Jr. have called him out. So we'll see, man. But regardless of all that, that was a grudge match.
Yeah, for sure. And for a number of years they've gone back and forth in the media, and often that's kind of why that's how a lot of these grudge matches wound up, kind of getting fueled or whatever between Khan and Brook. For some reason, like a really large portion of the shit they were talking was accusing the other of being gay and not coming out of the closet. I don't know why, but for some reason that featured really prominently in the trash talk. We'll stay away from the rest with that for the rest of the grudge matches today, thank goodness. But what's a really good grudge match, or one, I should say? I don't know. You say grudge matches in boxing, and you think that's the one.
Well, I mean, first off, I think I'm just going to stay with the UK theme on that, because if you want to talk about absolute grudge matches, that probably still kind of resonates today, even though they look like they're on good terms. You got to mention Chris Eubank and Nigel Benn. You have to bring that up, because that's about the definition of a grudge match when it comes to it.
Man, yeah, I'm not going to lie, because I don't really know that much personal between them, or at least, or if other outside the ring stuff has happened, I don't know too much about it beyond that special that they did a few years ago where they're like, were dressed up as warriors and acting all crazy at each other. Beyond that, I don't really know.
When they started getting a little too feisty.
Yeah, like a little too snippy at each other, like Hearns and Leonard on Mike's show a while back. But like, but beyond that, yeah, dude, they clearly, it was like the same guy. They're both like megalomaniac weirdos who would like kind of dress kind of eccentric sometimes. say weird shit. You know, were both very full of themselves, but also both very good fighters too. Like they were both. I'm not saying their styles were the same or anything, but they both were
But
just kind
yeah,
of
they
like
were just
very
like opposites though in their
egotistical.
personalities. Like they had very unique personalities, but very opposite in how
Yeah,
they
they
act. Like
clashed for sure.
Eubank always exuded that very like arrogance. You know what I mean? Like everybody's beneath him, and you're kind of very like you see like a stuck up individual, the way he talks, the way he
Who's the
is,
dude that he knocked out in like 5 seconds? It was like Reginald Dos Santos, I want to
and
say.
the way he just poses, right? He
Yeah, and
stares
then he
at him
knocks him
down.
out and he just walks over to the camera and goes
Yeah,
for
yeah,
like
yeah.
20 seconds just looking at the camera. And like, that
But
says
for
a lot.
all of his arrogance and all of his smugness and the way he was and psychology of it too, because he was intimidating. You know, a guy was completely sculpted out of his mind. And as after he became champion and became like a superstar over in the UK, with his gold trunks and the way his entrances would be, and he just staring at you and all that, and stoically, I totally get it. But back then on the come up, like Nigel Benn was the complete opposite. Nigel Benn was a bad boy. Nigel Benn was like a dude who came up very rough in the streets and like a guy that just, like you meet him in the alley and front chances are you're gonna end up with your head stuck somewhere like a really, really, really bad dude. And Ben was much more known in the US because he came over, in the late 80s, made his bones in Atlantic City. Um, Matchmaker Ron Katz was responsible, I think, for matchmaking a few of those fights.
And they
But
brought him over to, I don't know if that's why they brought him over, but as he was brought over, he sparred with a number of high profile fighters too,
mhm.
which also I think helped to get his name out there in
Well, yeah,
boxing
they were trying
communities.
to hopefully build him up because he was
Yeah,
so excited in the way he was. They wanted to build him
exactly.
like guys like Michael Nunn and Sugar Ray Leonard or Duran Hearns, whoever it could be. They would have been fascinating fights because Ben was an animal at that point.
Yeah.
Um, watch his fight with Iran Barkley, for example. It's only one round, but like Ben was nuts. Kim's out there just swinging wildly, drops Barkley, hits him while he's down a couple of times. If this fight happened today, chances are Ben would have been disqualified. But like in 1990, somehow he's able to get away with it. And then after the fight, in a very infamous interview with Alex Wallow, he's basically like, "Yeah, I did what I had to do. Whatever. I don't give a shit." Like, very dismissive of what happened and saying, how he hit him while he was down and just not really caring about it in general. So, but um, at that point in time, when their fight was being built up, um, you had it where like it was just it was I think in 1990 this was the fight that was supposed to be like in the UK. Both guys at that point. I mean, Ben had lost to Michael Watson, I believe, but Eubank was undefeated, and even though it was for the spurious WBO title, like that was about as big as it got at that point.
Yeah, we talked about the group of kind of like British and Irish super middleweights that all had a kind of a round robin from around that time. I don't remember what show we did, but nonetheless, we talked about them before and we kind of went over some of the stuff that happened. But yeah, dude, Nigel Benn was clearly a really explosive, athletic, hard charging, hard punching fighter. Anthony Logan, that's another fight that he had that was like two
Mm-hmm.
rounds, and it was like holy shit, like it's non.
Oh,
It's
he
like
had a bunch of them early on, man. A
yeah, there
bunch
was
of
a
them. He
whole
was
bunch.
just like Ben was this rampaging, almost in the mold of like Mike Tyson, but even more kind of reckless and wild
Would
as a
walk
middle.
into shit all the time. Would
I had
just be
no
like
problem
going
doing it. Yeah,
wild and just bam, like walk into something and then 10 seconds later he's like
his
knocking the dude
recovery would snap
unconscious.
up. Yep.
It's like I mean, just jarring shit, dude. So you could totally see how he would speak to whatever UK public, American public, easy fighter to understand, and no translation needed.
Mm-hmm.
But Chris Eubank, dude, on the other hand, he was always dressing fly, or dressing weird. The dude always had the kind of a funky sense of style and shit. But also actually they both spoke with a lisp, but Chris Eubank far more prominently,
Yes.
and like, it was almost to the point where like his personality kind of just struck you as somebody you would love to hate. Somebody you would just be like, I don't like him. I just don't like him. And then so you
And
wanted to
that's
see
how
his
it kind
ass
of was for
lose.
that fight. And then
Yeah.
the build up for this one too, like Ben was the much more established guy. He had just come off the knockout of Iran Barkley, like we said, and he was looking, upon a lot of like major fights on the upcoming the upcoming months. Chris Eubank, on the other hand, had no one, even though he was undefeated, he'd still not really separated himself to being like a top contender or anyone like that. He just had a big mouth and very cocky, arrogant, and all that. And Ben was that dude that just wanted to shut in. He was pissed off and he wanted to fight him, but that didn't happen. It ended up being a very, very compelling fight. In a fight that most people thought that Eubank would be wilting in. Nah, he matched Ben right away from the jump, and with his unorthodox style and the way he fought and everything like that, he slowly but surely wore Ben down. And and then he scored it. Ended up knocking him out in round 9, I believe it was. So that was like a big blow to that. But that also started, an influx of like a new era in the middleweight, super middleweight era in the UK. With a bunch of guys coming out there like that. But this wasn't the end of their rivalry either. You know what I mean? After that fight happened, Eubank now is an established superstar, not only in the UK, but he's making waves in the US. Like everybody kind of knows him after that because that was a very, very good fight. And that was a huge win for him. And like you mentioned, the way he was and his personality and all that, like he's going to make he's going to make news. So soon after, he has that very tragic fight with a contender, Michael Watson, but makes a number of defenses before he eventually moves up to super middleweight. Same thing with Nigel Benn. Nigel Benn moves up to super middleweight, becomes WBC champion, has a number of defenses himself, and it leads to a build up before they're going to have a rematch now, which is being televised on Showtime.
Yeah, dude, it actually seemed like I'm not gonna lie and say I remember this at the time, like this is predates most of my fandom and stuff like that. So
Yeah. I'm not gonna say I didn't watch it live. Absolutely not.
Yeah, just a couple of years too late for me. But even so, reading back about it later, this was one of those things where I remember like earlier in the days of the message boards and stuff like that, and we'd be talking about rivalries or we'd be talking about stuff that we need to go back and check out because we didn't see it live, and now we have better access to it. But the British super middleweights, the British middleweights were always from this era what people would be talking about. Yeah, you need to go back and watch the Eubank, Watson, Ben, Collins. You need to watch the back and forth between these fighters. And so it was a true grudge match because obviously Nigel Benn winds up getting stopped. And then as Chris Eubank kind of continues on, still though, I think Chris Eubank was having a difficult time finding respect outside of, locally. And Nigel Benn was, like we've said, just far more, far easier to relate to, far easier to watch. You know what I mean? Like the language he spoke inside the ring was just a little bit more understandable for most fans. So, and also on top of that, he clearly wanted revenge for being stopped. And I mean, it's Nigel Benn. Who are you going to tell him no to revenge?
I mean, and if you look at their records with the upcoming fight too, like Ben was clearly on an upswing. He had beaten a lot of contenders and scored spectacular knockouts, whereas Eubank, even though he was WBO champion, which wasn't very, very lightly regarded in the US, he was defeating good contenders. Don't get me wrong. Guys like Sugar Boy Malengo, who would go on to become champion. Ronnie Yesset was a good fighter. Tony Thornton was a longtime contender. These were Lyndall Holmes was a former champion. These were all good guys, but at the same time, he was going the distance with all these guys too. He wasn't like really distinguishing himself as anything like above the pack. You know what I mean? So at that point, when it was coming to the rematch, most people thought that Ben would be able to beat him at this point because Eubank would always kind of like fight at the level of his competition. That was what I started reading about as a kid, more or less, was that like against guys when he really had to step it up, he would step it up and look spectacular. But if he was just kind of going through the motions, sometimes he'd fight to the point where a guy that really had no business skill-wise trying to compete with him the way he was, he'd almost lose to him. So
yeah, it was almost like he needed to be motivated or something like
that.
Yeah,
he had to be motivated. And again, that kind
of
comes down to like arrogance and almost something like that. Again, that a person so beneath him that he doesn't feel like he has to push to turn it on before to win or anything like that. But Ben was really to the point he was motivated. He was ready for this fight. He thought this was for a chance to right his wrong. And what makes it really bad is that like I'm not going to go into detail about the whole fight because it's on YouTube and it wasn't really anything spectacular. But by all accounts, most people thought that Ben won the rematch. And instead, he had to settle for a draw, which is even more bitter to swallow.
Yeah, and that bitterness carried over probably to now to some
I'm
degree.
sure it does to some degree. Like, these all these guys that were rivals before, and unless they really, really like hug it out and buddy, for the most part, you can always see there's some kind of underlying tension between them. And there definitely is always going to be some with Ben and Eubank, even if they're going to get along a little bit. There's still
Yeah.
something.
And actually, I guess that analogy with Tommy Hearns and Ray Leonard is actually pretty damn spot on, because Hearns loses to Leonard in the
Mhm.
first fight by stoppage, and then has to settle for a draw in the
In the
rematch.
rematch in the fight,
So
most people,
that,
everyone
yeah,
thought
that
totally
almost
won.
everybody thought he
Yeah.
won. So it's like, similarly, he's kind of pissed off, and he never got the proper blah blah blah. And Tommy's my favorite fighter, so of course I'm like pissed off for him. Fuck right. No, I'm just kidding. But I get it. I totally understand. But so whatever year it was, I want to say it was like 2008 or some shit like that. They were on some British show where they're on their man. I'd have to even look it up. I can't even remember all the details from the show. I just know that they were both on some reality show and started jawing at each other, and they damn near came to blows on the show, like half dressed and
It
shit.
was Eubank. So he started, he was feeling himself, and he was like, yeah, my muscles are feeling good. I'm doing that. He started throwing punches, and he told Nigel, he was like, we should have a little session. That's what we do. We should have a session. And he was like, maybe, just a little session, Nigel. What do you think? And then and then Ben gets all pissed off. We don't need to have a session. We can do this right now, type deal. We don't need to go anywhere. And then they started they shove each other, and they getting all over there.
I'll tell you what, at least Eubank in this instant wasn't wearing his fucking pointy shoes. What the fuck are those, man? I don't know what the fuck is pointy. What's going on with his pointy shoes, Aris? And his dancing.
Or
I don't
like
understand.
my favorite thing is him as a trainer. When that one time, you remember the time like when Eubank Jr. was in the corner and Eubank Sr. was just staring at him, didn't say a word to him. the whole
He is
the whole
so eccentric. He is
he literally
so
just stared at him the
strange.
whole time, didn't say a word, just stared at him, and then just walked out of the ring afterwards. And he just kind of like, wait, what?
He's so strange, dude. Like he's just a strange fellow. I don't know what to say for him. But I bless them because they gave us a fun trilogy, or a fun set of
Two
fights
points.
anyway.
And you know what, too? If you're gonna vote for one for the Hall of Fame, you have to vote for the other. I hope
That's
they
kind of my feeling too. Yeah.
yeah. Like they got to go in together. You know what I mean? And it would
No,
be
I'm
cool to
with you.
see them get inducted together to see what would happen. I'm sure they'd be getting along and take photos and be all joyful, but just it would be interesting.
I'm gonna be there. I'm going to be there in the crowd. Hey Nigel, Chris said he'd kick your fucking ass.
Yeah,
I'm gonna be fucking instigating some shit. That'll make it fun. Well, speaking of instigating, dude, I got another grudge match to hit you with, and we don't have to spend a ton of time on it because, like I said, we talked about it a number of years ago on a different show, but it's good revisiting. It is a good grudge match, fun fight, fun, backstory to it, and that's Johnny Tapia versus Danny Romero.
Oh, absolutely.
We talked about it on our crosstown rivalries show, and that was like our second or third show, bro. Like, that show was a long time ago. So in any case, Johnny Tapia, as we all know, if you're a boxing fan, you should know. And also, there's a real good book out by Paul Zanin, who with the help of Teresa Tapia, Johnny Tapia's widow, he wrote a book about Johnny Tapia's life and the kind of a lot of the things that he had gone through in his career leading to his unfortunate death. But nonetheless, if you know about Johnny Tapia at all, which most of us do, he's a very mercurial character, a very hot-blooded, intense guy in just about every aspect of his life. He loved intensely. He cared for people and would do damn near anything to help them, but he couldn't help himself. And so he lived intensely in that way, where he was on and off drugs for a number of years, I think, specifically.
Beautiful human.
What's that?
He's a beautiful human, though, man.
He was extremely human.
Flawed.
That's what he was. He was extremely human.
Yeah, flawed. Had a lot of demons and all that, but if I had a
And
chance to meet him
understandable
once,
demons.
yes,
Like
absolutely.
1000% understandable
If you
demons.
went through what he went through as a child, I mean, I hope nobody ever has to go through that. But it's
I I'm I want to say it, but I'm just not going to, because it's such a downer. I don't want to go there right now.
yeah, absolutely.
Point is, he saw some horrific shit, and throughout much of his career, especially starting in the early 90s. Through the 80s, it actually seemed like he was doing all right overall in his career and had his head screwed on pretty straight. But then starting in the 90s, he really lost control of his career and his life and had legal trouble off and on. Really had to fight his way through life, and I suppose through boxing in some ways as well. He was a very strong amateur, and also had a good financial backing, especially for a guy at that weight. Where at that weight, you just don't really see, fighters at that weight getting much financial support below bantamweight, below featherweight ish. I don't know. I mean, probably even going up to like lightweight. You just don't really see that much money pumped into fighters of that size. And he had a lot of opportunities that, speaking straight, he blew that shit. Nonetheless, he worked his way back. And by the time he had worked his way back onto like a kind of an HBO level where he was fighting regularly and doing very well, he seemed to be, on a pretty good run. Danny Romero, they're both being from New Mexico and both being from not that far from each other. Johnny Tapia was several years older than Danny Romero. I want to say 7 or 8 or so, something like that. And in any case, they weren't close enough in age to where they knew each other, in the amateur circuit or anything like that. By the time that Danny Romero was really making his way on the amateur circuit, Johnny Tapia was already a pro. He was already, well into his career. But it seemed to me like what had happened was Danny Romero, who was trained by his father, Danny Romero Sr., him and their families seemed to feel as though Johnny Tapia gave New Mexico boxing a bad name, that he was a bad guy, a bad character, a bad boy getting into legal trouble, etc. And those kinds of things were not very becoming of a fighter or whatever. And so also Danny Romero got a lot of opportunities that perhaps Johnny Tapia either didn't get, or if he got them, did not properly take advantage of them and fuck them up. And so I think that there was resentment on both sides here. I mean, just speaking honestly, and some of it might have been fairly legit. Some of it was kind of stupid and fucking petty. But what wound up happening was they jawed at each other so bad before the fight, talking about the disrespect and blah, blah, blah. So-and-so's trash. No, this person's trash. That they actually literally had an entirely separate press tour for each fighter where they did not have press conferences together. And instead was like they'd have a Danny Romero press conference and a Johnny Tapia press conference. They shared a luncheon one time, it looked like, which did like not go well. So they discontinued that shit. And one of the guys who was actually talking about it, I was reading a moment ago, was Bruce Trampler from Top Rank, who worked with Top Rank for a number of years. I don't think he does anymore. Does he still? I don't even know.
Pretty sure he's still on the matchmaker. Yeah, I think he's still with them.
I don't pay attention to any of that shit, to be honest. But regardless,
he's like their Teddy Brenner. He's been around forever.
Yeah, he's been doing it a long, long time, and this is how far back it goes, the early 90s. Anyway, so that's kind of how bad this grudge match was, and it wound up actually leading to a pretty good fight.
Oh, absolutely. Another aspect too is that, like, even like you mentioned, Tapia had a lot of start and stops in the early 90s. He also became a WBO champion in the early 90s when it didn't really mean much, but I mean, he was undefeated. He was clearly really talented and making a lot of noise, but every time he started building some momentum, something would happen with him being arrested or whatever it was, and he had to take some time off. Danny Romero during that time started making a lot of inroads and like becoming popular because he was signed with Top Rank back then. And I remember when I first got into the sport, I saw him featured on a couple of pay-per-view undercards where he scored spectacular knockouts. And then, he was finally featured in a primetime spot on the undercard of George Foreman, Axel Schultz, where he fought for the flyweight championships, IBF flyweight title against Francisco Tejedor. And
God, that's another guy who was around for fucking ever.
But forever. Yeah, absolutely. But you're totally right. Colombian guy, really tough guy too, very crafty fighter. And so the story behind that fight, which I read about in the Ring magazine after it happened, was that this was not only was it being featured on HBO, I think it was the first flyweight fight ever featured on HBO like that, but this was the first time an American was champion in the flyweight division in like 60 years or something close to it. You know what I mean? Like they just Americans in the flyweight division were just completely cursed because you didn't really find many guys 112 pounds like that. Anyways, Romero won the fight, and like, you know, again, being featured by Top Rank, kind of like how they featured Michael Carbajal at the same time. Like he was going to get a lot of, you know, time. He was personable, good looking guy. He was knocking dudes out left and right, big power, everything. Like he had the momentum behind him. Tapia was obviously like kind of like bitter and like mad about it, right? Because Tapia felt he was the better fighter. He's the one that should be featured. Exactly. So that was like, there's a lot of resentment going on with both of them. And Tapia thinks, oh, you know, he's a spoiled golden boy, easy, silver spoon, asshole, whatever it is. I'm the one who has to come up tough. So an interesting thing that comes up, though, is that in 1995, this was the first time I saw Tapia fight. Tapia fought a journeyman named Willie Salazar. Willie Salazar got the fight with Tapia because he scored a major upset over Danny Romero, where in a non-title fight where he broke Romero's eye socket kind of freakishly and, you know, ended up scoring a TKO over it. So, you know, the golden goose was kind of like, you know, broken at that point. Tapia fought him on a pay-per-view undercard and beat the bejesus out of him because I watched that on pay-per-view. So from there, you know, but the thing is, the fight still wasn't really being made. Like it was, you know, both guys kind of jarring back at each other, but nothing was really coming of it. It wasn't until Romero finally moved up to junior bantamweight and knocked the hell out of a respected champion named Harold Gray. And at that point, Romero now was with Cedric Kushner, and it was, you know, the fight was like, it was built up to this point where it looked like, you know, things were that like you just said, HBO had it built up. It was built to a true super fight now.
Yeah, dude, there was absolutely no question that, you know, it was the time was right for it and everything. It was 1993, I want to say, in which Michael Carbajal and you know, Humberto Chiquita Gonzalez got the first $1 million purse for fighters of that size. And so I think that there was kind of like some molds being broken, I guess you could say. And on top of that, leading into this fight for the first time in a long time, I honestly don't know how long I'd have to look, but for the first time in a long time, two flyweight sized fighters were featured on the cover of Ring magazine. And that was it. That had been a long ass time since that had happened, and people were even like interviewing Nigel Collins to ask about, you know, all about, like, you know, the hubbub about the little fighters and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, the point was it was a fairly big deal, especially considering all of the factors going into
Oh,
it.
I mean, when HBO, when like I said, Romero moved up, he scored a spectacular knockout. Then they were featured in a on a Boxing After Dark and co-fights. Tapia knocked out Marco Antonio Barrera's brother, and Barrera and Danny Romero knocked out, you know, his mandatory challenger. But the stage was set. You know, it was a big fight. Like you knew everything was going on, but they couldn't even hold it in New Mexico. That's how big it was. Like the tensions were so crazy that they knew it was dangerous to hold it there.
Yeah, they were actually they said that they were afraid because at the venue they were getting reports that people were armed in the crowd and that there were a whole bunch of people had guns, and so they were going to like shut this down and shut that down, and they didn't wind up doing it. And thankfully no fucking, you know, no Daniel Kinahan shit going on and nothing happened. But no way in craziness. But regardless, you know, it was still pretty intense though. You can definitely feel the tension, and you can, it was very much like almost like the rubber match between Barrera and Morales, where like beforehand they're just like you can't even let them like get face to face, dude, because some shit's about to happen. And
it's just at that point now.
Yeah, the exact same type of shit. And then throughout the fight, Johnny Tapia's like, you know, like, you know, sticking his tongue out, like making faces at him.
That was such controlled, perfect emotion that he did in that fight. That was a beautiful performance because, like, for a guy that everyone was like thinking because of how excited he could be, the way how emotional he was, how he fought, and everything like that. Everyone thought that like he was going to leave it at the door, try to slug, and maybe get knocked out. Instead, he channeled all of that and just put on an absolute clinic.
Yep.
A clinic.
Yeah, dude. And actually, it's funny too, because watching that fight, it's been a little bit, but watching that fight, you can actually see that, like I said, they're pissed. They're super pissed fighting, and they're fighting pissed at a few points too. But even so, you could see kind of like Romero getting frustrated and then Tapia doing well, and
Yeah.
almost it's almost like because he's doing well, he's like, oh, we should make up. I'm kicking your ass. Let's make up. And Romero's like, fuck you, dude. Fuck that. And but Tapia's like doing well, so he's like, cool, let's make up. And you could see by the end of the fight, Tapia tries to go over and give him a hug, and Danny Romero senior's like talking or saying something to him, and they're jawing at him. And it was crazy too, because even after all of that, Danny Romero was like, no, that didn't even happen. None of that happened. And he stayed bitter as shit about it for a long. He's probably still bitter about it, dude.
Well, you know what? I guess they did make up, because there was articles showing them that they like were friends afterwards in Ring Mag like a few years later, and they fought on the same card again. I think a couple of times, did other stuff, but like it looked like they seemed like they were
good, because New Mexico boxing's too small for that shit.
yeah. But it's Tapia is just like one of those guys, man. That like I hope he's in. He's definitely not in the Hall of Fame. Yeah, I hope he makes it in. Surprised he's not. Is he? No, he's not in, right?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't even know if he's on.
Damn, now I'm about to look right now, because
it's off the top of my head. I don't know why. I just like I can't remember or not. But
I'm about to look, but I'm going to say no. I'm going to say I don't think so.
I agree with you. I don't think he is.
I'm about to look it up though. He's on their website, but that doesn't necessarily. Oh no, he was inducted in 2017. Damn, why didn't? God, I smoked too much pot. Anyway, wowzers. So yeah, he belongs, even just in the sense that in terms of accomplishments, they might be thinner than you might realize, because he's so easy to root for. He didn't have a ton of accomplishments as a fighter, and very hot and cold. Far too many ups and downs in his career, but in terms of influence I mean, not like a bad career. Not one of those guys where I'm like, oh no, he doesn't belong. He's probably fairly borderline, and a lot of the outside the ring shit, a lot of the ease with which you could root for him probably factored into that too. So I don't have any issue with that. But
one thing I love, that like one memory I have of him that I'll always just like was really cool was and I wish I could find this photo, but at the Hall of Fame, I can't even tell you what year it was, but it was the year Daniel Zaragoza got inducted. But I don't remember what year that was. And so on the podium, they always have all the fighters. They'll always have all the fighters like setting up and stuff like that beforehand. And Tapia was sitting next to Zaragoza, and my dad was up there taking photos, just snapping along. And without even asking or doing anything, he just kind of did this on his own. Tapia was sitting next to Zaragoza, put his arm around him, and then put his head down him, like cradled it like he was like a little kid with his dad. And he just kind of laid there for a minute, and Zaragoza started smiling. Like Tapia almost did that for my dad entirely, because my dad was in front of him when he did that. And he just did that, and all of a sudden Zaragoza smiling. My dad started snapping, and the other photographers noticed what was happening. They ran over and started snapping it too. But it was just like a cool moment that he didn't really do it more so to like get a photo, but he was just like totally like, hey, this is my buddy. I love him. I'm just like, admiring, just put his hand down. Like he was just really happy to be there.
For he today who sheds his blood with me shall be my brother.
Yeah,
it's that same type of concept where they're brothers in arms. So I get it, and that's a cool, poignant moment.
It was really cool to see. Like it was almost just like he just laid right there on him, and he saw this, and he had this look, like this innocent, like happy look when he was doing it. It was cool.
Like I said, easy guy to root for, extremely human. I guess there was really no other way he could have gone out. You know what I mean? Like that guy was not going to go riding off into the sunset.
But you know what, man? At least when he passed and they found out there was nothing in his system too.
But yeah, so just such an easy guy to root for. And it sucks the way that he went out. And like you said, I'm happy that there were no drugs in his system, because literally everybody thought that, and kind of rightly so, because of how many issues he
I
had.
mean,
But
totally, yeah, that makes sense. But you know what? There was no other way he was gonna go out. But I mean, that's one of those type of lives. He's there for one moment, makes an impact with everyone, and then he's out.
yeah, it was unfortunate, but that's definitely that Tapia Romero cross state, cross city rivalry is a grudge match for sure. What's another one,
And it
dude?
was also cool to mention,
Oh
just
yeah.
a little, really, really quick, to say that like that whole card was awesome because it also featured the smallest fighter that was ever world champion, Baby Jake Malala, just butchering Michael Carbajal on the undercard, bro.
He was an extremely tiny guy.
And it was just so like with the biggest smile on his face and his little arms. He's 4'10", and like Carbajal towers over him, and he just cuffed him around, bro. And it was, when Merchant afterwards, because he was, he said that Nelson Mandela was his idol and all. They was like, oh, you're gonna have lunch with Nelson Mandela now, and the biggest smile gets on his face, and he was like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Dude, and actually it's funny too, because Nelson Mandela was a huge Baby Jake Matlala fan.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They loved each other. Yeah, they became
Awesome.
besties. But
Yeah, dude, Baby Jake, man, South African fight legend for sure.
and it sucks too because if Chiquita Gonzalez didn't abruptly retire, um, that was supposed to be one of the fights on the early Boxing After Dark. It actually was featured. It was publicized in one of my old Boxing Digest magazines,
Fun.
advertised. That is said, I forgot whatever the main event was, but the undercard was going to be Chiquita Gonzalez, Baby Jake.
That sucks, because Baby Jake would have gotten a nice payday for that, and that would have been fun.
Yeah, that would have been an awesome fight. But another one that I wanted to bring up because it features two obnoxious, loud ass guys from the 80s. And that would be Vinnie Paz and Greg Haugen.
I knew, dude. I'm telling you, I don't know what it is about New England, bro. But I was looking at, like, I was trying to figure out, all right, like which grudge matches we got, because I need to see like what the spread is so I can pick
Yeah.
here, and like try to find some shit that's obscure or something like that. And I kept finding like New England grudge match after New England grudge match, dude. It's like motherfuckers from Boston hated motherfuckers from Providence. But
That's true.
dudes,
No,
it
they
was
really
like,
do, man. Like everyone, I don't like when
oh
people
my
tell me I'm
god,
from New Bedford, Mass. All right, and I can't stand it when everyone just associates me with Boston. Like, oh yeah, you're from Boston. I'm not from Boston. Okay, I've never been from Boston. I don't like Boston. I don't like people from Boston in general. Like, it's just one of those things. I mean, not to say I hate everybody from Boston. Don't get me wrong. There's a few nice people there, but just in
yeah,
general, it's
dude,
not
your
a place I
Boston
would
card just
get.
got pulled.
Yeah, I'm just no. Don't also that's a whole other part of Massachusetts where I'm not even close to. You know what I mean? It's true.
I don't know what. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's just that every place is so distinct that there's got to be grudges. But yeah, dude, but that's another one. Pazienza and Haugen, dude. That New England, and yeah, aren't they still bitchy at each other?
Oh yeah, they hate each other.
Like, yeah,
Absolutely.
aren't
If
they
you
like
if you go
they'll
to Haugen
literally
and bring
take.
up Paz, if you put them in a room together, they'll
Yeah, they'll
definitely
take
bring
like
it out.
any opportunity they can. Like, you bring it up and it'll be like, yeah, fuck that guy, fucking hate that.
Mhm.
Like, they'll start going
Totally,
off. Like,
totally.
my God, dude. Didn't y'all take care of this? Apparently not.
Well, no, too, because I mean the fights were pretty controversial,
Yeah,
especially
that's
the
true.
first two. Like the first one, which took place in Providence.
He's just such a goofball. It's tough for me to take him serious.
Which one, Haugen or
Yeah,
Paz?
well, both of them, but more Vinny Paz than Haugen.
Yeah, but I mean, you gotta think of the way they came up. Haugen obviously always had a major chip on his shoulder. He came up in the tough man ranks in Alaska, which God knows how tough that is because him weighing barely above 130, 135 pounds back then. There's no weight divisions. Fighting guys that weighed more than 100 pounds that he did. Um, Kind of like in a throwback to the early 1900s, I guess, right? But like Haugen, by all accounts, came out undefeated in these fights. Like he whooped everyone's ass, and he was an accomplished amateur as well. So Haugen had a chip on his shoulder from that. I mean, I think anybody would from just knocking out like big you know, big Alaskan lumberjacks. I mean, if I can lay one of those guys out and I'm 135 pounds and I lay out a dude that's 240, I'm going to talk a lot of shit myself, wouldn't you?
I mean, I think that there's just a different kind of fucking swagger that comes from, and obviously I can't speak to this from fucking personal experience. I'm a
Yeah.
little beezy dude, but like, you know, there's different kind of fucking swagger that comes from somebody who's like been in a lot of street fights or a lot of fights that aren't like a sport. You know what I'm saying? Like you're fighting in some
Absolutely.
like some room or something, you know? There's a different kind of swagger I think that comes from like when you're like successful on the street. And Haugen had that shit throughout his entire career. He was like just kind of a cocky dude, you know, and you know, it didn't stop with Pazienza. He talked shit to Chavez to his detriment.
In front of 100,000, over 100,000 people that would call in for his head.
Yeah, dude, don't ever make the mistake of walking up into Julio Cesar Chavez fucking sparring session and saying all you do is spar with Tijuana cab drivers, because he will take it out on your ass in front of
Yes, in front of
125,000 people.
100, yeah, people in a crazy stadium where, it broke records, but I
It
don't
was like
even know.
4 or 5 rounds, and after 4 rounds,
It was
Haugen
just a
looked like it
straight
had
up
been.
beat down, man. That was a beat down and
It
a
looked like
half.
Haugen had been through like 45 rounds, not 5 rounds.
Yeah,
Look, he looked awful.
it was bad.
But
But
yeah. Anyway, Pazienza. Sorry,
so no, it
we
was
just
one of
love the
those things
history.
like Haugen came up from the tough ranks. So beating guys that are 100 pounds bigger than you or more or whatever it is, you think he's gonna be worried when he turns pro and fights a bunch of lightweights. So no, absolutely not. He came up tough. He fought really tough guys on the way up. He fought guys like Chris Calvin, who was a very, very tough, rough lightweight. Charlie Brown, Edwin Chiarette, until he eventually fought Jimmy Paul for the belt. For the IBF title, and a big upset at the time, which was featured on Showtime. He outboxed Paul and out roughed him and scored a win. So his first defense though was against Vinnie Paz in Providence, Rhode Island at the Civic Center, and to go fight Paz in the 80s. I mean, this would count as any time, but especially in the 80s at the height of Pazmania. Um, in the 80s is like walking into like I don't what would be an aptus what would be like a good
It would be like walking into Buffalo when Joe Macy was at his height.
yeah
The
or like
third
some
franchise.
absolutely like when you got to go to someone's hometown that's absolutely like or going to Tony Lopez to fight him in Sacramento, you know what I mean, like any one of those type of places, like you're going
That's a
into
good one. Yeah, going to
yeah
Arco Arena and trying to
and trying to beat Tony Lopez,
to go.
you know what I mean, like where you're already 5 rounds down just walking in. So or trying to fight Jerry Cooney in upstate New York, like, or in Long Island, any of those type of deals. Like, you're going to fight that deal. And then, so it was kind of a no-win situation. And then Pazienza being a loud, obnoxious guy the way he was back then, coming from his area, and Haugen being loud, their personalities were in a clash. They already hated each other, but it resonated in the ring and they put up a hell of a fight. Like, that was a really, really, really good fight. And as close as it was, as good as it was, you might have thought that Haugen edged it, but it was close. But no, Pazienza ended up winning a decision.
Yeah, I thought that was a fight Haugen probably could have taken, but it was pretty close, dude. Like,
Yeah, it
real
wasn't
close.
like an out and out thing that Haugen was robbed in, as much as he likes to say he was. But no, Pazienza, in a close fight, he was going to edge it, and that's what he did. He won by a few points in all the carbs.
Yeah, Paz probably took it on the strength of his mustache at the time. I'm not gonna lie to you. Shit was pretty 80s, bro. Shit was legitimately 80s. But no,
I
it
mean,
was
less than a year later, they had the rematch. So
yep. It was a pretty good fight. It was a entertaining fight, hard fought. They weren't, going light or anything like that. But like, yeah, dude, it seemed as though I don't know. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Hopefully, he doesn't wind up listening to this. But I was never really a Vinnie Paz fan, like in general. Like he's just never really, I don't know. Seemed like not really my favorite, my kind of fighter, I guess. But even so, that coming off the strength of that win, all that did was just feed Pazienza's ego or feed his in-ring ego, whatever, make him even more of a, a maniac than he already was. And so going into the rematch in Atlantic City it's a considerably bigger platform or bigger venue, at least in terms of recognition from boxing fans. Obviously,
and it's also much more like neutral territory.
exactly. It probably was more emotional fighting in Providence, but in Atlantic City, it's like more neutral ground. And on top of that, just provides a bigger platform for both of them. And on a bigger platform, yeah, dude, again, they fight a rematch. And again, I thought the fight was fairly close. I mean, at least they're not the kinds of fighters where when they get in, dude, it's like kind of like Morales and Barrera. Like they cannot let the other dude one dude hits the other guy and the guy's
It's
like,
a
oh, fuck
hatred.
that, I gotta
Yeah,
get
there's
back.
no way they can let each other just,
Yeah.
it's ridiculous. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, you wind up getting Greg Haugen coming out with the decision this time, which Vinnie Pazienza will never shut up about. So it's like one guy and then the other guy. It's like back and forth.
Nor
Dude.
will
They're
he ever
really
shut
made
up
for
about
each
the
other.
Hall of Fame either, will he?
Well, that's one thing I got to give an advantage to Greg Haugen about because I've been hearing about from Greg Haugen's PR people about getting him into the Hall of Fame. But yeah, dude,
Yeah, man, that's one
they're
of the
made for each other.
a lot of grudges. Even the Barrera Morales one. I mean, I don't know. I guess they've had a recent spat, but for the most part, usually like as the years go by, they kind of mellow, right? Most of these guys. These two haven't, like you said in the beginning of this, they still haven't. If you bring up in an article, like Vinnie Paz has said on Twitter many times, if someone brings up Greg Haugen, forget him, screw him, I hate him, yada 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 yada, right? And Greg Haugen, as far as I know, is not on Twitter, but whenever he kind of emerges in an interview or wherever it may be, he certainly doesn't have anything nice to say about Vinnie Paz either. So
poor Greg Haugen though too, because it's like his biggest career moments are the rivalry with somebody more famous and getting his ass kicked by Chavez. So I'm sure that's what anybody ever always asks him about.
Like, yeah, his biggest fights were his losses. I mean, against the most high profile guys. He lost 2 of 3 to Vinnie Paz. That's his biggest rival. Pernell Whittaker in his first, he's known as Whittaker's first title win.
Just washed his ass. Yeah.
I mean, he tried against that fight. It wasn't
no shame, but he washed his ass.
No shame at all. He just got absolutely whooped from first round to the last round. And the losing to Chavez in front of 120 some thousand people.
Yeah, dude. With Vinnie Pazienza's style, an aggressive guy who doesn't have a ton of power, but he could sting you. Mm-hmm. And then Greg Haugen's, who's definitely a far more a more orthodox kind of like a little bit more textbook type of fighter, in terms of like the style matchup and stuff like that. So I mean, it's a natural style matchup too. And then after that Pernell Whittaker fight with Greg Haugen, he wound up having to come back, which he did. But the guys that he came back against were kind of like, at best middling level 140 pounders, and Guillermo Cruz and Robert Nunez. I don't even know who Robert Nunez
he
is.
does have one thing over on Vinnie Paz, is that he did put an L on Hector Camacho.
That is extremely true. Yeah. And that ain't worth nothing. That's
absolutely not. That was the first loss Camacho suffered too.
Yeah,
that was a fight Haugen was not supposed to win, but he put on a hell of a performance in that one. And granted, Camacho was going through a lot during his career at that point. He had a lot of outside.
He finished the job Rosario started.
Yeah, he had a lot of outside things going on, and it was kind of crazy that he finished the 80s undefeated at that point in the first place. But still, to be the man, the first put an L on Camacho was huge, and Haugen was able to do it.
Dude was doing so much coke around that time, dude. He'd be like, Hector, and he'd be like, huh? What?
Yeah.
Fuck. No shit. Holy shit. Yeah, the fact that he got through the 80s is even,
is even crazier, even crazier. But yeah, so he does have that over Vinnie Paz, because Vinnie Paz got slapped up by Camacho when they fought.
Yeah, dude. I mean, you know what? I'm actually about to look this up, because was there a rubber match on the No, it was not on the undercard of something. It was the main event. Okay, I didn't know.
They did have a rubber match, yeah.
Yeah, they did have a rubber match, and Haugen won a 10-round decision. And I'm not gonna lie, I don't specifically remember that, but it looked like it was promoted by Top Rank or not Top Rank, Main Events. So I mean, I don't know, it was big enough for them to have a third fight. But yeah, they're still bitter at each other after all of these years, dude.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like
grudge matches.
Kind of like battling Nelson and Adwal, I guess, huh?
That's a good one. I didn't even think of that.
I just thought of that right now. I just really just thought of that right now.
I should have thought of that. That's a really good one. Damn.
The reason why is because at their old age, when they both of them were going senile, I think they still hated each other, or training for, you know what I mean? But yeah, there you go.
Yeah. What's his name? Ad Wolgas. I mean, I don't know how true this is, but this is one of the things they used to write about at the time, and you probably would bring it up if I didn't, is the fact that the orderlies in the mental hospital in which he wound up said that he still trained for a fight, even when he was old, thinking that he was getting a fight or that he was going to make a comeback. Not even old. He wasn't even that old. Like, he was just messed up.
No, his brain was just complete mush.
But that's a really good one, actually. That's a really good one. Damn, I wish I were more prepared to talk about that, but I'm not gonna lie. The only thing I will say about that is that their wives were friends.
Yes.
Their wives were friends and were pissed that their husbands wouldn't be friends or wouldn't make up. I
Wow, but they really couldn't stand each other. They talked a bunch of shit before the fights. I think Nelson hated it more than Vargas did, but it turned out for their fight because they hated each other so much. That's when they were both more or less kind of like, hey, let's just have this fight to the finish. Fouls allowed, whatever, just kind of,
Was it the last title fight to the finish?
More or less. I mean, the fact that they put it for 45 rounds, well, I mean, what was it scheduled for?
I think it was scheduled for 45, but that initially was going to be to the finish. Like, that's what.
So 45 rounds though was more or less a fight to the finish. Who the hell is going to fight 45?
Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it was the final 45 rounder. There's something
because it's one of those fights that like 45 rounds that essentially is a fight to the finish, especially with the gloves that they're wearing and how that brutal it was.
Yeah, dude.
Because that was brutal. I mean, even today.
Well, you see the photos from it, the grainy ass photos from it,
or even the video. Considering how grainy video was and how primitive it was back then, that's one of the few fights that stands out. You can still tell how brutal it is. You can hear it. You can, like, some of the punches you hear, like, one of the rounds you see Vargas rip Nelson with an uppercut, and you hear that thunk like that, and you just see his head snap back, and like you can totally tell this wasn't like really mauling that they did in that era where, kind of like going, no, these guys were beating the hell out of each other badly.
Yeah, there are definitely fighters where you watch them and you're like, oh, this guy wouldn't last a round. And then there are other fighters where you're like, damn, this dude just
and that was just one of those fights that, like, if there was like an enhanced version of it and color and everything, you could really watch it. You would probably like label it TV 18.
Wink, yeah. Smooth Legends. Wink.
Exactly.
Wink. Our homie Smooth Legends.
Please.
Get it up, bro.
Yeah.
Put it through the AI. No, that's a good one though. That is a really good one.
A more modern one that you could bring up would be, and this is actually one that I don't know if these guys ever got over it. Roy Jones, Antonio Tarver.
That's actually, I guess Bernard Hopkins doesn't really figure into the grudge with Tarver, so it wouldn't really be a three-way.
Well, Hopkins Jones,
yeah, Roy Jones definitely rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, dude. James Toney wanted to take his ass to Burger King. Fucking Bernard Hopkins was 60-40 kick your ass. Fucking,
and then Tarver.
People just hated Pensacola ass Roy Jones, dude.
I mean, understandably so. We talk about arrogance, you talk about supreme, and just the way you are and kind of everything. Like, yeah, man, a lot of those guys were definitely pissed off at Roy and like wanted to chance at him. Sometimes they felt like, well, if you watch his fights back then too, in the 90s and the early 2000s, and the way he's just fighting all these overmatched opponents on HBO, that he's just, has no chance of losing.
And he's got the little tail.
Little short tail. Yeah. And he's walking in with a suit on and all this other stuff, and he's just having fun and joking and putting his hands behind his back while he's knocking out these dudes and all this other shit. Like, you have guys like Tarver, you have dudes who like you mentioned, Tony, who's been rejuvenated, and other contenders who are sitting there just like, I want to fight him. This is bullshit. Why can't I get a shot at Roy Jones? Whether they're going to win or lose, they just they felt like they were being shafted.
Well, and right or wrong, and this is one of the big issues I have when people talk about fighters who are supremely gifted, where they say things like, well, he'd beat him anyway if he fought him. And it's like, I don't want to fucking hear that. Then just fight him. Then just fucking fight him. Because the whole like, well, he doesn't need to fight him because he'd beat him is it's some dumb shit. But that's what wound up happening, unfortunately, for several years of Roy Jones' career early on, where, he was clearly from the very start, like every single one of his fights is on tape. And when you have a fighter where every single one of their fights is televised it gets really difficult for that fighter to argue they're being like mistreated financially, or in terms of attention or promotion. I should say they could still be mistreated financially, but nonetheless, Roy Jones was one of those fighters where he got a lot of attention. The 1988 robbery in Seoul, I think, led to a lot of appeal to emotion on his behalf, where people were like, he got fucked in the Olympics. He should be a gold medalist, and he should have been. Don't get me wrong. I'm not arguing that whatsoever. But that also led to a lot of that, and his talent led to a lot of kind of special treatment compared to a lot of other fighters who also were working hard but didn't get those opportunities, including Bernard Hopkins and Antonio Tarver, or at least so they felt.
For sure. And Roy never really had those standout fights like at super middleweight. We'd mentioned before, he never fought Ben, he never fought Eubank.
A number of punchers he never fought.
A number of guys in that division that he would have been favored against had each had a chance to happen, but it never did. And then when he moved up to light heavyweight, sure, he beat Mike McCallum, but McCallum was already past 40 something at that point. He beat Reggie Johnson and a few other guys. Like Jones was looking spectacular, but there was still, you were just waiting for him. Like he never fought Daruj Mikachowski when they had the chance. He didn't fight other guys that were out there. So you're just kind of like waiting and anticipating, thinking like, when is he really going to be challenged again? While you have these guys waiting in the wings, trying to get their opportunity. And then when Jones moved up to heavyweight, that's when it seemed like when Jones was like threatening to move up to heavyweight, that's when Tarver was really starting to make his moves. Because Tarver was like, you got to remember, it wasn't like after the 96 Olympics, like Floyd Mayweather, like David Reed, like Fernando Vargas. He didn't just get straight shotted to a title within 15, 16 fights like these guys did,
and
right?
Sorry to interrupt you, but considering his age, he probably should have been
absolutely,
like, because he was much older than most of the other
him and Lawrence Claybay were the elder guys of that.
I think Larry Claybay was the team captain. Yeah,
he was. Claybay was already in his mid-30s, and Tarver was already in his early 30s or something, or close to it. So yeah, he was already like, because Tarver was already like, he came from Jones's era, like from the 80s, and then like he had some issues, kind of fell out of boxing and came back to it. So, but yeah, he was like slow building, and even when he was first coming up, they knew that he had talent, he was good, but he didn't really stand out so much. Like I watched his early fights on Tuesday Night Fights and a few other ones, and he just really wasn't featured all that like that. Like people weren't excited about him. They were the way they were about Mayweather, the way they were about Vargas, Reed, so on and so forth.
Measured southpaw counterpuncher.
Yeah, he just like he was winning his fights, but he just wasn't really standing out with it. And then finally, when he finally stood up and got and then with a fellow contender, he lost pretty emphatically against
Harding. Yeah,
Harding, I think, broke his jaw, beat him up, and just won a pretty comprehensive decision. So it looked like Tarver was really never gonna reach his potential. But like I said, when Jones started making talks about moving to heavyweight, going through other stuff, Tarver all of a sudden kind of turned into another gear. And that's when slow building, but he really stepped it up from there. In the rematch with Eric Harding, he blasted him out. What was that famous, with the referee at the end of it? He goes, yeah, man. You okay? I'm from Philadelphia. Like,
yeah. It almost seemed like he was saying it because his brain was scrambled, and not because he was saying, I'm tough, I'm from Philadelphia. Like almost like he thought the ref was asking, where are you? Because that's a common question to ask for fighters. But it was like,
but the way he said it just made it.
I'm from Philadelphia.
I'm from Philadelphia. Like I can fight. Yeah, and then Mercer was like, you heard what he said? I'm from Philadelphia. He was all proud.
Yeah, and then next thing you know, it's that old southpaw versus southpaw matchup, dude. The overhand left is going to do it every time.
Tarver was losing that fight too.
Donk, like fucking 15 times in a row. And the dude was just fucking done. Now, that was a fun fight too.
So, but Tarver had become a legit contender at that point. He had beaten Eric Harding. He had beaten Montel Griffin, I think, to win a vacant title. He had scored some spectacular knockouts too against a couple of other guys. So Tarver had momentum going his way in the light heavyweight division, especially when there wasn't a lot of other contenders really standing out at that point. He was the one that was like, you know what, if Jones decides to move down, he should fight him. And Tarver started making noise about that. Like, I want to fight him. I want to fight him. We got
He started
unfinished
showing up to the
business.
press conferences.
Yeah. He was getting really, really loud with it. And then when Jones finally decided he wasn't going to stick to heavyweight and move back down, that's when the fight got made. And as we all know, Tarver, like, Jones eked out a very, very close decision, but all that did was fuel Tarver's rage.
Yeah. I actually remember a lot of that pretty vividly. I don't know why. I guess just because of the time it was.
I mean, it was a cool era too.
Yeah.
That was the early 2000s, and you could see that was the first time, besides getting dropped against Lou Del Bell, that Jones looked really vulnerable on fight.
Yeah,
like,
he looked
really
shitty all night. He just went to the ropes and covered up. And although I will say, I personally thought Roy won that fight, but
a lot of people do too. Yeah, man.
But
Absolutely.
there were a lot of cries of robbery, like Tarver deserved it and that type of stuff. Even though, like I said, I don't agree, because Tarver, despite the fact that Roy kept going to the ropes, just kind of put him on the ropes and then was like waiting. Like he was afraid Roy was going to lash out, but Roy didn't have it. He didn't know that Roy didn't have it. So it was like he waited too long. And then in those moments where he was waiting, Roy kept hitting him with body shots. I remember that shit and thinking, damn, like he's ripping some body shots, bro. But he won those rounds. So, but yeah, that's kind of how that shit started. And going into the grudge part of it, Tarver felt as though Roy Jones had gotten all of these opportunities and he had to go through the hard way or go through a more difficult division, which I don't know, I guess whatever. By that point, the division had been thinned out. So I don't know that Tarver had really cleaned it out or anything.
That's why I was going to say, man, that's why he emerged as the top guy, because the division was rather thin at that point.
It was hobbling at that point. It was not a very good division. But even so, he emerged as clearly the top contender. He had some sort of history with Roy Jones, so he said, or so he felt. And then after that first fight, he kept jawing that he deserved it. He was going to do this, that, and this. And I remember I kept thinking, well, if Roy recovers from this, he's going to outbox him in the rematch. Like Roy's going to whoop his ass, dude. This is going to be bad. That's not at all what happened whatsoever.
It started out like that, though. Do you think that was a lucky punch? Because Roy, I'm going to say it, man, Roy was putting it on him for the round and a half before he got clipped.
I thought that Roy clearly looked sharper there than in the first fight. Like he just had more time to get acclimated to the weight, to, loss and gain and stuff. Yeah.
Buddy McGirt was like Bernie McGirt was a little like, you can tell he was a little animated in the corner after the first round because Tarver got hit up quite a bit. And he was like, "Oh man, you can't be getting respect." And you hear Tarver, "Don't be using that word in that corner of me."
Yeah. I don't respect him. I would have been like, "Shut the fuck up and just go out and hit him, dude." Respect what? Just go hit him. What? Yeah. Like I'm trying to give you advice, bro. Shut up.
But then he did, man. That was one of the most surreal things I had ever seen as a boxing fan. And still today, that was incredible.
You do got to give it up to Tarver in some way, because even though his eyes were closed for that shot, he knew what he was stepped doing. Into it though. Like
he knew what he was doing. Yeah, absolutely.
He knew Roy was moving backwards, so he stepped with him and threw it. I mean, I don't want to get too into the fucking technical analysis here.
Yeah, that was a beautiful shot because it caught Roy clean, and Roy was out.
There was a GIF of Roy getting knocked out. And so I'll keep this part brief, but on the message boards back in the day, there were a handful of fighters whose fans were considered like the worst, right? Felix Trinidad was one of them. Man, those passionate Boricuas, man, they got it. You know what I'm saying? They love their island. They love their fighters. It's all good, but they show out on social media for shizzle.
In the early days we're talking 2001. I think the first time I used to read Dougie's articles was right before Trinidad Hawkins. His mailbags.
Fools used to attack.
They were going in on him because he had the nerve to say that Trinidad wasn't the GOAT.
Yep. They used to attack his ass because, of course, this was at the time where Trinidad was supposed to run through Hopkins and go straight to Roy. So it was like, well, if he's on this epic run, but whatever.
He's going to knock out Sugar Ray Robinson. He would have beat this guy, that guy.
Right. And so then a lot of the other fans of like another fighter who was Roy Jones, his fans were fairly insufferable when it came to like message board arguing and shit like that. And so after he got knocked out, there was a GIF going around of him getting knocked out. And some of the people on the Max Boxing message boards, whenever some shit would be said about Roy Jones, they would literally just string together a number of the GIFs so that it was like a massive block of like 9 gifs by 9 gifs of Roy Jones just getting knocked out, and they just be like, fuck it, I'm out of here. And they just leave. It was so visually striking, you know, seeing Roy Jones fall like that. Like, that was brutal, dude. It was a bad knockout. And then on top of that, and then I'll shut up so that you can get your word in edgewise. The rubber match, though, to see Roy Jones walk through that shit so awfully, and then afterwards openly admit, yeah, I really just fought to not get knocked out, was sad as fuck, dude.
I never watched that rubber match. Still, it
You
just
didn't
was
miss
one of
nothing.
those fights that wasn't appealing to me.
You didn't miss nothing.
Because I think that fight happened after he got knocked out by Glenn Johnson, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I was just
Yeah, because he said he wanted revenge. I don't think he really wanted revenge. I think that he literally wanted what he said after the fight was, I thought, a lot more truthful than before, which was he literally said, I wanted to fight to prove to my dad I wasn't going to get knocked out. And that was one of the saddest things I've ever heard in my life.
Especially coming from a guy like Roy Jones, who's basically Superman.
Like, bro, you didn't even fight for yourself here. You just fought so that your dad wouldn't talk shit. Jesus.
It's heavy.
Ouch. That's rough on a number of different levels.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, you didn't miss nothing. But that grudge match, obviously, you know, Tarver kind of got the final laugh on that one, unfortunately. But, you know, needless to say, Roy Jones obviously had the greater career.
For sure. By no question.
So I got a good one that I can almost guarantee you weren't going to bring up, or at least I hope, because I don't want to steal this one. That would be a bad one to steal. But one that people are probably going to listen and go, what? Never heard of that. Donald Curry versus Emmett Linton.
Okay. You know what? I definitely was not going to bring that up, but that's actually
okay. Just making sure.
That's a good point, because I'm not that familiar with the story, but I do know that there is a backstory to it that culminated in them fighting.
Yes. So I got the backstory, or at least most of it. I don't know all of it. I'm not going to pretend to know the details, but Donald Curry, as many boxing fans know, in the 1980s was extremely popular, considered like a can't miss type of fighter. From a technical standpoint, one of the best fighters I've ever seen.
Oh my God.
Fast, sharp, good punching power, good head movement. He just could not take a chin, or he did not have a good chin, could not take a punch super well. And that wound up, at least in part, being his downfall. I think he definitely had issues with training. And on top of that, it wound up, I think, coming out years later that and it's unfortunately very sad that we've heard that he's not doing so well recently. But he also had a lot of issues with motivation and training. And he said later on that he was fearful throughout much of his career and that he didn't really want to fight. That like he did not have the mindset of a fighter. And it's funny because there are a lot of fighters like that. You think of a fighter and you think like, oh, they're vicious, they're ferocious, fucking, you know, the fear never, blah, 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 you know, it's like some monstrous entity you're thinking. And that's not always the case. Sometimes
he also had an insanely long amateur career, which a lot of guys back then too.
Extremely accomplished amateur. You don't get paid shit. You're doing it for free for forever.
And he didn't even get to make it to the Olympics, which he undoubtedly would have.
And you get burned out, dude. And I think that was also part of it. He got burned out and just didn't love it. You know, he didn't love it. He didn't want to fight. And he was just a regular guy who was like, I'm not a crazy fucking, you know, animal. I'm just a fighter. He just happened to also be really, really good at it. After he had already kind of fallen from grace, he had a lot of outside the ring troubles. He had some drug issues that were at the time denied. He didn't, you know, he got a bunch of attorneys that were like able to get him out of trouble a number of different times. But it sounds like he also, you know, was involved in some bad shit. After he'd fallen from grace and kind of had started picking himself up, getting his career back together in the 1980s, toward the end of the 1980s, a fighter named Emmett Linton, Donald Curry had opened, he had started his own promotional company. And actually, it's the dumbest name. And so I feel stupid now for forgetting it because it's literally the most basic. It's like Boxing Promotions Inc. or some shit like that. I think that literally might be it. Yeah, it's literally Boxing Management Inc. Wasn't kidding. So he started a management company called Boxing Management Inc. He took on a whole bunch of fighters, and actually a number of these fighters are super recognizable names. It's just that they weren't at the time, and he couldn't hang on to them. So he had Skipper Kelp, he had Freddie
We talked
Norwood.
about him. Yep.
Yeah, he had Freddie Norwood. He had Kevin Childrey, who was actually at the time a really, really good amateur. A couple of years before that, he had a number of really good local. Carl Daniels, he had Carl Daniels too. He had a number of local fighters or fighters from around the U.S. that he had brought to Texas so that they could live and train there. Like he was like, doing it big. He was taking care of these fighters. But Emmett Linton was an extremely talented fighter who at the time was undefeated. He was like 20 years old or something like that in 1990, 91-ish. And so he and Donald Curry had gotten fairly close. I think Donald Curry had recognized that Emmett was one of the more talented fighters in his stable, except for Emmett Linton. Like reading on him, he sounded like a dude who he didn't really want to be there either, or he had other interests. He had other places he wanted to be or other shit he wanted to be doing. And then he wound up rebelling against Curry in the gym. Curry would constantly be, telling him what to do, and he would say, "I don't like him telling me what to do." It's like, well, he's like an extremely good amateur and a really good pro trying to help you out, bro. And so I'm not taking sides here, but it kind of sounded like Linton was fairly ungrateful. And even like there was this news story that I was reading a little bit ago before we started, just kind of, making sure I have extra details about this shit. This reporter for the Fort Worth Star Telegram goes into their gym, and he's Donald Curry's sitting on the apron trying to give instructions to Emmett Linton, who's sparring with somebody, and he's telling Emmett Linton, "Keep your hands up, get your hands moving, something, shouting some shit." And so then after the sparring session, Emmett Linton goes over to the reporter and starts talking to the reporter and basically talking shit, saying like, "Yeah, I don't like him telling me what to do," and stuff like that. And then Donald Curry goes back to the reporter and saying, "Yeah, I don't think he wants this fight." It's like a very bizarre, especially like
Yeah.
you'd think that if you're a manager, generally speaking, you don't talk shit about your fighter, right? Like you're talking your fighter up. If you're a promoter, you
Absolutely.
don't talk shit about your fighter. You're talking your fighter up, So it was kind of a strange situation, but here's what wound up bringing it to a head. So Donald Curry, like I said, wound up getting into a number of legal situations, and on top of that, he fathered a child out of wedlock. That wound up, I think, getting him divorced from the woman he was married to. So he had children that he had to pay child support to. He was doing something with the money that was like keeping money away from them or something like that. And so Emmett Linton, according to him, gave his ex-wife information that she was able to use to get child support payments out of his ass. And then because he had done something funky, he wound up getting sent to jail because of the child support issue, and at the same time getting indicted for drug charges that were later dropped, but it was like drug trafficking charges, pretty fucking serious shit. Mm-hmm. So he literally said that the day that he got booked into jail, he was like, "I'm fighting Emmett Linton." And that shit was years later. So he literally got put into jail in the early 90s, like 92 or 93 or something. And so they wound up fighting in 1997, I believe. And it was 1997, in April of 1997. And there's even more backstory to this. So obviously they're pissed at each other and shit like that. Emmett Linton doesn't like him because he's been telling him what to do years ago. He's his manager, blah, blah, blah. And then he'd moved on. But Donald Curry, in the midst of what's basically his comeback, and he says that his comeback literally started, and he knocked out a dude named Gary Jones that was 3-24 in Winnipeg. So whatever. But his comeback, he said he started because he wanted to beat Emmett Linton, that he needed to kick his ass for what he did. So that's literally what his comeback in 1997, after being off for 6 years, starts from. He's coming off of, in his last fight in 91, a knockout loss to Terry Norris, who at the time was, fairly up and coming, I suppose, had lost a few times, but was still kind of in the midst of his prime. There's so much to this already. To pile on even more, Donald Curry gets pancreatitis, inflammation of the pancreas, which causes extreme abdominal pain, vomiting, diarrhea, all sorts of other shit, can cause like, weak difficulty breathing. And leading into the fight, he gets pancreatitis, looks like absolute dog shit in the fight, and gets the crap kicked out of him. And
Yeah,
then
he was washed.
TKO'd in 7 rounds and just looked like absolute hell. And then after the fight, it turns out he has pancreatitis after they do a bunch of blood tests. And he's like, yeah, I'm coming back to fight again because that's why I didn't look good, because I had pancreatitis. And he held a grudge against Emmett Linton for years.
He never fought again, though, did he?
Nope.
Yeah.
Thankfully, he was talked out of it.
Damn.
So yeah, I didn't even
know that whole backstory. I knew there was a story to it when he came out of retirement to fight him, but like,
me neither.
No.
I looked up grudge matches and saw that and was like, I didn't know about that. Okay.
It's pretty crazy. Well, I'll bring up another one. Like, since I rather, I guess it's better that we keep it obscure more so than talk about ones that everybody knows about all the time. So here's a good one too. Do you remember when JC Candelo fought Verno Phillips?
Yes. One of his trainers used to post on Max Boxing right around this time, and that fool used to go off about shit. Go for it.
And like, we're talking about like with that fight, there was some kind of backstory and beef that like Candelo owed Verno Phillips a bunch of money. He never paid him off, and he was like, avoiding his debt. So Verno Phillips stole his dog, his dog, his gloves, his robe, and a bunch of other items, and he said he was going to put them all on eBay. And that was the whole thing. And yes, I'm looking at a Boxing Talk interview right now where Verno Phillips is talking about how he stole all of his stuff and was going to put it up there.
Dude, Verno Phillips was that dude was such a character, man. And his trainer, and might have been like assistant trainer, whoever the fuck it was up on Max Boxing on the forums and would frequently go on there and like talk shit and like, all sorts of stuff. It was funny. It was good stuff. JC Candelo, the junior middleweight division, that kind of like middle portion of the junior middleweight division in these years was fucking fun as shit, dude. You had Verno Phillips, who I think twice fought Kassim Muma, right? Yeah, I'm pretty sure they.
Yeah, it was twice.
Was it twice?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I thought it was twice. Yeah, but I think I want to say the first one was on ESPN, second one was on HBO. I want to say
Showtime,
something like that. Yeah.
So one of those, yeah.
So all right, so like I said, smoke way.
But yeah, you had Uma, you had JC Candelo, you had Verno Phillips. There was quite a bunch of guys coming back.
Remember Julio Garcia?
Yeah,
he was kind of on the fringes. He wasn't quite at their level.
Cuban lover.
Yep.
Yeah.
Fucking love that guy. But yeah, dude, there was a
Corte had come back. Carlos Bojorquez was around. Like there was,
yeah, dude. There was it was a good little kind of proving ground, perfect for that kind of Friday night fights level. I don't know too much about their backstory, but I'm not even remotely surprised because Verno Phillips was always seemed to be getting into some shit or like talking up some shit or something like that. JC Candelo seemed like a pretty funny dude in his own right.
So, I mean, you have to like listen to some of this right here. So this is him from my old Boxing Talk interview. And he was like, and so Verno Phillips, he was like, yeah, I still want to fight him because I got something for him. I got his dog. Bulldog that retails anywhere between $2,000 to $3,000. I got his robe, I got his boxing gloves. I'm going to put all that shit on eBay. And cutting and laughing. You don't really have his dog, do you? Yeah, I got his dog. And he was like, so you really have his dog? Yeah, I got his dog. On the real, like I have his dog, but I gave it away to my man because I didn't want to clean up the mess and all of that. Tell him that his ex-wife told him that the dog ran away. The dog ain't run away. I got it. I could have done worse, but I just took the dog instead. And then cutting in, he doesn't owe me $200. He owes me $300 plus. But I got his dog, and when the time comes, I'm going to get in the ring and beat the shit out of him. After his fight on January 20th, tell him to put it in the contract.
All I know is that if you took my dog, we wouldn't make it to the fight.
I'm saying, right?
I'm just saying, like maybe I'm a little baby who loves animals or something, but I'm just saying if you stole my dog, we ain't gonna be getting into no boxing ring.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever, I mean, hey, you got to get paid, but that's wild. Dog napping.
Yeah, like it's wild. Then they ended up fighting, and Ted and Verno ended up putting a beating on him. That was like, kind of just solidified him as like a long-time contender that he was.
Yeah,
Like
Candelo
Verno
had a
Phillips was
short.
a very fun fighter, man, and a guy that was like around for a long time, made for really good fights. Never really established himself as the top of the division, but always gave everybody a tough time.
Yeah, dude.
When Ike Cortez come back, so when Ike Cortez came back, I think his first fight was on HBO. Well, no, one of his first, like he had an easy comeback fight in, I think in Ghana or something like that. But one of his first comeback fights, like the second fight, was against Verno Phillips on HBO. I think on the undercard of Tarver Glenn Johnson too. And like that fight was basically Verno Phillips summed up in a nutshell. Like Cortez got out to a really quick lead. He was jabbing him, looking really good, everything like that. But then he started fading a little bit. Phillips started coming on, and Phillips dropped him hard twice near the end of the fight where Cortez barely hung on, and Phillips, I think, lost by a point.
Yeah, dude. It's Verno was one of those dudes who was like, he was not a heavy puncher, but he threw hard. Like,
And he was crafty too in his own way. Yep.
Yep. Not super tall, and he was always like coming up, yeah, he was a fun dude to watch, and he was on Friday Night Fights and like that level a number
And
of different
ESPN,
times.
yeah,
He
and
was
even
fun.
before Friday Night Fights, like he was around up from like the late '80s all
That's
the way
true,
into
yeah.
the 2000s. Yeah, man, he had a long career.
That's true, yeah. I wonder how that guy is. I haven't heard mum from dude. I hope he'll be doing all
I'm
right.
sure
He
he's
was a
fine.
fun guy to watch for a while.
Wonder whatever happened to that dog.
Yeah, well, I mean, unfortunately, I think doggies probably does not have the shelf life to.
I mean, of course not, but I'm curious what happened afterwards. Did JC Candelo ever get his dog back?
I hope so, because a man without his dog, man, it's bad
That's
stuff.
some bullshit.
It's bad stuff. Well, I got another one. Let's see. It's about so probably don't have too much time left here, but nonetheless, I got another one that I think is a really good one that I think you're gonna like too. Because I know it's one that I think that you've brought up on a different show. Just can't remember for what. And that's Ray Mercer versus Jesse Ferguson.
Yes.
How
And it's interesting too because it's not so much a rivalry where these guys like outright hate
right?
each other, but
Yeah,
it's just the circumstances that came about it that like
exactly.
made it become one.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not this was not a situation where you have two fighters where, they really are like just different people and they just don't like each other because they didn't get along or something like that. But you have it was actually it was on pay-per-view, 10-round fight, and back in 1993. And so basically there was, I guess, what had happened between them was really the only selling point of the fight, because it's not like Jesse Ferguson was like anybody to like write home about or bust plans for or anything like that. But yeah, hey,
No, he had definitely settled in as a journeyman, and was the gatekeeper at that point.
yeah,
Definitely.
it's just that I guess he was pesky enough to Ray Mercer the first time that he was trying to literally mid fight trying to bribe the dude to lay down mid fight because he's having a difficult time during the fight, a more difficult time.
Well, here's the thing: is
It's
that
just so
like
crazy. Like
it was on the undercard. It was on the undercard, I believe, on the undercard of Riddick
holy
Bowe,
shit.
Michael Moore,
Yeah.
not Michael Moore, on Riddick
No.
Bowe, Michael Dokes,
Yes. Yeah.
and Mercer was next in line to fight Bowe. They already had and those two had their own grudge at that point.
And
From the
Sarge,
88
dude, this
Olympics.
was when he was hot. This is when
Yes.
Sarge was hot.
Like he had lost to Larry Holmes, but I mean, he still was reeling or riding off that knockout of Tommy Morrison. It was still,
exactly,
as a high level contender. And like I said, him and Bowe had a rivalry. Those two didn't like each other. They were beefing a lot from the Olympics.
And
like
Larry actually looked pretty decent that night. So it was kind of like,
yeah, exactly. To the point where their managers hate each other too. Mark Roberts and Rock Newman.
mm-hmm.
There was a infamous scene on Tuesday Night Fights where Newman actually shoves Roberts across the room when they were arguing, talking about why the fight hadn't happened yet, because they tried to make the fight and they were blaming each other for why it didn't happen. So long story short, Mercer was finally in line to fight, challenge Bowe for the title. And so Mercer, as we found out would happen from time to time in his career, just didn't come in motivated that night. He just didn't have it. Some days he came in and could give you hell. This time he just didn't. And a guy like Jesse Ferguson, even though he had established himself at that point as not being, quite at the top of where those other guys were. If you came in underprepared, he was a tough enough guy and a crafty enough guy that he could out hustle you. He could do that, That's what journeyman guys do. That's what gatekeepers do. If you don't come in at your peak and just, you had to take care of business, they could surprise you.
Michael Bent your ass.
Exactly. They could totally surprise you. So Ferguson was just going about it and Mercer was looking like shit. And so during the fight, you start hearing there was rumblings that they were clearly talking, but that's when Ferguson was saying that Mercer was going, hey, man, 100K. He was like, I just don't have it tonight. I'll give you 100K to lay down. I promise you, man, that's your cut. All right. I'll pay it to you after. I swear on my mother, I'll pay you 100K to lay down. I just don't have it. And then Ferguson said something to the effect of, you should have trained tonight, Ray. And then kept on working him and then ended up scoring a decision. But hearing all that talk brought a lot of attention, a lot of controversy to the point where there was a hearing too, right?
Yeah, dude, they launched an investigation, and basically it sounded like Ferguson was one of the ones who he didn't push for it, but they went to him and he was just like, yep, that's what he was saying.
But you heard them talk and you couldn't really you couldn't really understand what they were saying either. Yeah. So it's kind of like,
yeah. But, well, and it's in the middle of a fight and shit too, but nonetheless, dude, that's what the criminal shit about it is, that his jab alone, he could have just dominated that fight on his jab alone.
Yeah, if he actually tried and actually trained, which all accounts he totally didn't, then he could have, because that I don't know who was in charge of the rematch, who promoted it. I'm going to say Bob Arum or somebody, but they ended up having a rematch, which they put on pay-per-view.
Yeah, the rematch was on pay-per-view, and it was Top Rank. Yeah.
There you go. So, because that just seems like a Bob Arum thing to do, to try to to use that as a storyline to build to a rematch on pay-per-view.
Instead
by all accounts, it was a really awful pay-per-view.
Instead of fucking distancing yourself and being like, yeah, I don't want any part of that shit, going, oh yeah, look at that shit. Let's use that as a promotional selling point.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, buddy. Sun City.
Yeah, exactly, right?
City, man.
But so that's what that went about. But what's interesting too is that Jesse Ferguson, journeyman extraordinaire, ended up getting the Riddick Bowe title fight because of it.
Well, dude, I mean, that's what's gonna happen, bro. That's what a waste.
But sometimes, usually, if a guy gets upset like that, if Arum's in charge, sometimes they'll just ignore it, like he did with Zahir Rahim with Eric Morales. What? The fight's not off. I don't care if he lost. The fight's not off at all. No.
And how they initially did it with Mayweather Judah too, because Zab had just lost to Valdemir.
Zab had just lost there, and the same thing. Zab immediately still went in with him, but with this one instead, now they put Jesse Ferguson in there, and Bowe looked at his absolute peak, destroying Ferguson. Because look, man, Ferguson had absolutely no business being in the ring with Bowe that night, but.
Yeah, dude.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really think about that as like a grudge match per se, but like the things leading to the second fight even happening.
And it actually stopped the grudge match from taking place because, like I said, Bowe and Ray Mercer hated each other back then. But yeah, there was a few others over the years too. As we kind of finish up, everybody knows the story about Fernando Vargas and Oscar De La Hoya and how much those two hated each other
in the snow.
And in the snow, and that Vargas said he got snubbed and kicked, and De La Hoya ran by and just laughed at him. But whatever it was, it built up the animosity. So when they finally had that fight, man, that was an awesome fight. That was a really awesome fight. But
you almost got to feel bad for Vargas that he held on to that shit for that many years and then winds up getting whooped despite being on steroids.
I was about to say, man, and then he takes steroids, gets himself jacked to the gills. Everything trying to be in his favor. Starts out well and still gets knocked out.
You did everything and still lost.
And not only lost, just got spectacularly knocked out, because that was a dramatic hook that De La Hoya landed. The way Vargas just dropped like a log.
Yeah, and then just bobbleheaded his ass.
Yeah.
Poor Fernando, bro. No, that's a good one.
And he never recovered from that.
That's a good one, and it's actually especially a good one because it kind of fits into that kind of crosstown rivalry shit too a little bit. Because even though it's not technically the same town, Fernando's from Oxnard, north of LA, and
but they did that with all De La Hoya fights back then. Remember, everything was a crosstown rivalry with him and Ruelas, Ruelas, Ruelas one definitely. There's
anybody who's remotely from Southern California, they're like, oh, they hate each other from way back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
No, that's a pretty good one. I had a couple others written down that I was just gonna bring up. Oh well, here's one that I didn't bring up that's easy and could be brought up on any grudge match list or whatever, and that's Ray Leonard versus Duran.
of
I mean,
course,
I guess Hearns kind of was, but I don't know that they really like hated each other. I don't think it was like
I
that.
think it was. No, I don't think they hate each other so much that Hearns was just bitter and just waiting to get a rematch. And as long as he could, he finally did. And like we mentioned, you only get a draw out of it. That just kind of, left him with a bad taste in his mouth. But
Yeah.
Duran and Leonard was an actual grudge match. I mean,
Yeah,
you
dude.
can't you can't play off how Duran acted.
Yeah, if one of the
Flipping off
dudes is
on
going
his
over and
wife.
grabbing his dick in your wife's face, that's a grudge
Yeah, and
match, bro.
flipping her off and doing all kinds of
Yeah.
other things like that, man. That dude was wild,
Yeah, shit's a grudge match. Yeah, for sure.
And a
You know,
and a and a solid and a great one too. I mean, because Duran is the only guy that was able to get Leonard to like get off of his game plan and try to fight him man to man because he was so pissed off.
for some reason, dude, I don't know why this is, but the timeline in my head just does not compute with Ray Leonard's career. Because for some reason in my head, I keep thinking that the Hearns fights happened before
Yeah.
Duran. Like I don't know why, but for some reason, it's just like there's some some misfire in my brain that just
Mhm.
wants to tell me that Hearns happened before Duran. I don't know why, but regardless, yeah, dude. The idea that Roberto Duran could come up from 135 pounds, get in there with a dude who's a good sized welterweight and has the kind of body type where he could put on weight and be okay. He's already super fast, sharp, good puncher, impressive in just about every way. Can be touched though. He got out of a few fights with like a swollen eye and shit like that
No, he
early
didn't.
on.
Yeah, Leonard
But I mean,
wasn't. He could be touched a little
yeah,
bit.
he wasn't untouchable, but he was also very offensive. And when a fighter's offensive, they're there to be hit more. And so it
Mhm.
happens. It's just what it is. But even so, the idea that Duran could, put on weight go from 135 pounds where he was dominant to 147, like, straight away, basically go straight at Ray Leonard. And then not only that, but like outman him, not necessarily like that was a super close fight. Actually, I think both fights were really close. That's what kind of sucks about the rematch, especially. But the first fight, super close. I remember one judge wound up scoring like fucking like 9 even rounds or some shit like that. Like, if you go to the BoxRec page, they have the scores on there, and one of the scores is like, how did he get that? And then there was the scorecard somewhere in the newspaper, I think, and the newspaper mentions that the dude scored like 8 or 9 even rounds or some crazy shit. But it was a close fight. It wasn't like Duran dominated whatsoever, dude. It was a very back and forth fight. It was just that the moments that Duran won, he definitely won more dramatically and bigger.
And he
And then he
clearly
also
won the fight.
and
Like
he
it was a
closed
close
strong.
fight, but he definitely won that fight. And
Yeah.
it stands in the test of time as maybe one of the top three it definitely top three greatest victories in boxing history. Like it's just incredible,
No question.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The way that he
Both
won
guys
it.
at their
And
peak, everything the way it went, and Duran came out
yeah.
on top. And you can't really say it was controversial. I mean,
Yeah.
close fight, yes. Controversial, no.
Yeah, he taxed his ass in Montreal, dude.
We
So,
did.
and it's a good fight too. But then going into the rematch, there was so much. Ray Leonard was able to turn the bad blood on his part into motivation.
Mm-hmm. And he was able to make sure he got the fight quick enough that Duran was still partying and just didn't come in peak shape. It was still a close fight, but Duran, Leonard was clearly just on another level kind of motivation
Yeah.
wise. And then when
Well,
he started
and
his
he knew that
antics,
gamesmanship. He
he did.
understood that. He obviously understood that better than anybody working with Duran.
Absolutely. And that's when he started playing those games. You could tell, I think the one that really set Duran off more than anything is when Leonard did the windup and then smacked him with a jab in the face. And Duran literally, you knew at that point he was like so disrespected and like
Yeah.
seething.
It's like a
Like he
big
was made to
brother,
look a
dude.
fool. Yeah. At
It's like
that
a
point,
big
he was
brother
pissed.
fucking with you, and you can't do
Yeah.
nothing about it. And you're just
And
like,
at that
fuck.
point, he was just like, oh my God. Like, that's why he was like, the hell with this. Like, screw this shit. Like, I'm done.
And like I said, the fight was still fairly close. It wasn't even like Ray Leonard
Yeah.
was like whooping his ass. Like
No,
it was
no, it was
fairly
fairly close.
close.
And if you notice too, right after Duran says no mas, you can for like a moment he wants to go fight again. You
Yeah,
can
like
tell
he turns to square back, but then he's like,
because
nah.
like he just realized I think like the error of his mistake, and he's like, no, 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 okay, I'll fight again. And they're like, no, you already quit, and he's just kind of like,
That's so shitty. That's every single time I post a photo of Roberto Duran, somebody says it, and I'm just like, shut up,
I mean,
shut up.
it took him years to break out of that no loss thing too, but he eventually did. But the less said about their third fight, the better. We'll just keep it at that.
Yeah, no shit, bro. Well, dude, fucking grudge matches, man. I will say that emotional part of boxing, the part of boxing where there's extra stuff going on around the ring. Like we talk about like fighters being gentlemen and like rules and like
Some
protocols and
people
stuff like
just
that.
hold it. Yeah, some people just hate, man.
And some people do really well with like, acting within the rules and keeping it classy and all that sort of stuff. But like the emotional part of boxing, that helps make it fun sometimes.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the beauty of boxing when you got two guys that generally hate each other and can't wait to get it on. You know that it's going to be exciting because of that, and that like whatever happens, at least it's going to be settled. That's what makes the sport beautiful. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
you hope that the dust gets settled. You can't. It doesn't happen all the time. Like we mentioned, Pazzicanza and Haugen still hate each other. If you really want to go way, way far back, like we were mentioning before we started recording, Joe Chowinski held a grudge with Bob Fitzsimmons all the way till his death. The man was interviewed in 1943, the year of his death, and he was still talking shit about Fitzsimmons, how much he couldn't stand him and how he was a backstabber and you couldn't trust him and he got lucky in all of his wins and all this other stuff. So like some people just hold grudges, they can't help it, but at least in most of the time in sport of boxing, you think that after you shed blood with the guy, you go there back and forth, you war it out, and then it's over. You know?
I myself am a grudge holder. So I
Yeah.
understand that. I'm extremely, very much a grudge holder. So I
Can't
get
trust
it.
that for Simmons. Trust me, if any of my other guys were still around, they'd tell you the same thing.
Yeah. Well, and from all account, or at least from the accounts that I have read, and based on who Koyenski was always hanging out with, I'd probably side with Fitzy on this one personally. But that's
Agreed.
just me.
Yeah.
Look, dude, I appreciate you talking grudge matches, dude. Thanks for the great count on Brook Con. You did a great job, of course, and it
Thanks,
was a lot
man.
of fun,
That
dude.
was a
A lot
lot
of
of
fun
fun.
talking history, of course, with you once more.
Yeah, bro, this was a blast. I had a lot of fun going down memory lane today.
Thank you so much, everybody who tuned in. We really appreciate you doing so. If you tuned in on YouTube, for instance, if you would go ahead and subscribe, leave a comment, very much appreciated. If you tuned in via any of the podcast apps, also subscribe there. Leaving a comment or review is also very much appreciated there. However, in the meantime, while you're waiting for a new episode, if you've listened to all of this one, go ahead on social media, for instance, Twitter. Follow my dude Aris Pina there at Punch Zone Aris. Follow me, Patrick Connor at Patrick M. Connor. We're also on Facebook and Instagram, those sorts of things. And yeah, man, Aris, I will talk to you soon, bro.
Have a good one. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Take it easy, people.